Adrian Wells promised peace, healing, and enlightenment, but behind the closed doors of his luxurious yoga retreat, he built a kingdom of control, fear, and forbidden rituals. Leah Turner, once a devoted follower, discovered that her spiritual guide was a predator hiding behind mantras of purity. When Naomi Fraser, a fearless journalist, stepped into his world of silence and secrecy, she uncovered a web of lies that reached the highest levels of power. What began as a journey toward inner peace spiraled into one of the most shocking scandals in modern Britain, a story of manipulation, betrayal, and the dark truth behind the yoga guru's dark secrets. Please subscribe for daily new update of crime story and watch till end. In the peaceful countryside of Oxfordshire, a man named Adrian Wells was transforming the idea of spirituality in modern Britain. He appeared charming, intelligent, and full of light, a man who spoke about balance, peace, and energy, in a way that touched people deeply. Born in Bristol, Adrian had once been a struggling yoga instructor, teaching small classes in community halls. But everything changed after a wealthy businesswoman, healed by his sessions, funded his dream project, the Wells Center for Inner Peace. Built on acres of quiet land surrounded by forests and lakes, the retreat soon became the most sought-after sanctuary in the UK. People from across Europe came, desperate to find relief from their chaotic lives. Politicians, actors, and high-profile executives were among the guests who paid thousands of pounds to attend Adrian's exclusive meditation retreats. His image was flawless, a man of discipline, simplicity, and divine wisdom. He often appeared in magazines, quoted by lifestyle bloggers, and invited to TV shows to speak about the science of spiritual cleansing. From the outside, everything about Adrian's world seemed perfect. The Wells Center glowed with peace, gentle music, the scent of sandalwood, the soft whisper of flowing water from the fountains. Guests described it as a place that made them forget the world's noise. Adrian's face was everywhere, smiling from brochures and websites, with his slogan, "Surrender to peace, find your truth." People trusted him completely, believing he was not just a teacher but a guide to their soul. His staff admired his dedication and strict rules: no alcohol, no phones during retreats, and full confidentiality about the sessions. These boundaries, Adrian said, were designed to protect their spiritual journey. Nobody questioned them because everyone wanted to believe in him. But what no one knew was that Adrian's vision of peace was not built on purity, but control. Behind the meditative chants and candlelight, something sinister was unfolding. Adrian had a private group of followers he called the Enlightened Ones. They were chosen guests who received special lessons in secluded chambers of the retreat. To outsiders, these were advanced teachings, secret methods of deep awakening, but to those inside, it was the beginning of a dangerous dependence. He would convince them that the body and spirit must unite in all forms, and that only through total surrender could enlightenment be achieved. Women were made to believe that any hesitation was a sign of spiritual weakness. They were emotionally manipulated, told that Adrian's touch was divine energy flowing through them. Still, no one dared to question him. His charm and power created an invisible prison around the retreat. Every employee signed strict confidentiality agreements. Every guest was watched carefully, and every whisper of doubt was quickly silenced with smiles and reassurances. To the outside world, Adrian Wells was the face of peace and progress. But within those sacred walls, a much darker reality was silently breathing, one that would soon tear apart the illusion of perfection he had built so carefully, and reveal the monster hidden behind the mask of a saint. Leah Turner had first heard of Adrian Wells through a popular wellness podcast. A 27-year-old fitness coach from Manchester, she had been struggling with anxiety after a difficult breakup. When she saw videos of Adrian speaking about healing through surrender, she felt drawn to his words. His voice seemed to soothe her, and his presence radiated calm. Within weeks, she saved up enough to attend one of his weekend retreats at the Wells Center for Inner Peace. The moment she arrived, she was mesmerized by the surroundings. The perfectly trimmed gardens, the sound of distant bells, the soft fragrance of burning incense. drifting through the air. Staff members dressed in white greeted her with silent smiles, and everything felt otherworldly. For the first time in months, Leah felt she had found a place where her pain might finally fade. Adrian appeared on the first evening, dressed in simple robes, walking barefoot through the meditation hall as his followers bowed respectfully. His eyes lingered on certain guests, longer than others, and when they met Leah's, she felt a strange mix of admiration and unease. He spoke for hours, about inner purity and releasing past burdens. People listened in awe, some even in tears. Over the next few days, Leah began to notice a pattern. Adrian was always surrounded by young women who seemed unusually devoted to him. They attended his private sessions and whispered among themselves, referring to his teachings as the deeper work. When Leah asked about it, an instructor simply smiled and told her that only those who were spiritually ready could be chosen for it. On the final night of her stay, Leah received a note inviting her to a private meditation session with Adrian the following morning. She was thrilled at first, believing she had earned his trust. The session was unlike any other. The room dimly lit, music playing softly, and Adrian speaking in a low, hypnotic tone. He told her that she carried emotional blocks that could only be released through energy alignment. The method sounded harmless, but the experience that followed left Leah feeling confused and ashamed. Adrian's actions blurred the line between spiritual practice and violation, and yet he framed it as healing. She wanted to believe him, but something deep inside screamed that it wasn't right. Still, she stayed silent. In the following weeks, Leah received several messages from staff urging her to return for advanced transformation. When she hesitated, they reminded her of confidentiality agreements she had signed, and subtly warned her not to misinterpret sacred rituals. Leah realized that others too were caught in the same web. Women who once smiled brightly now looked distant and drained. A few quietly disappeared from the retreats altogether, their names erased from the guest lists. Rumors began to circulate online about women leaving the Wells Center under strange circumstances, but no one had proof. Adrian's fame and influence made him untouchable. Every story of doubt was dismissed as jealousy or misunderstanding. Leah's silence grew heavier each day, and though she tried to convince herself it was all in her mind, a haunting thought refused to fade. The man worshipped by millions was hiding something far more sinister than anyone could imagine. Naomi Fraser had spent the last 10 years uncovering corruption and hidden abuse across the UK. She had exposed fraudulent charities, illegal nursing homes, and even a corrupt politician. But nothing prepared her for the anonymous message that arrived in her inbox one rainy evening in The email subject line read simply, "The Wells Center isn't what it seems." Attached were a few blurry photographs, women crying in dimly lit rooms, a list of encrypted files, and a short note, "You think he heals people, he destroys them." The sender remained anonymous, signing only as a former disciple. At first Naomi thought it was another exaggerated tip, but as she began to research Adrian Wells, she noticed inconsistencies, missing employee records, sudden staff resignations, and social media pages of former followers that had vanished overnight. The deeper she looked, the more she realized something was wrong behind the perfectly curated image of peace. Determined to uncover the truth, Naomi booked a weekend retreat under a fake name, posing as a journalist on a spiritual break. From the moment she arrived, she felt something unsettling beneath the surface calm. The guests moved in silence, always watched by staff members who seemed overly alert. The sessions were rehearsed, the smiles mechanical, and the atmosphere heavy with control. Her assigned room had no locks from the inside, and cameras were placed discreetly in corners, justified as security measures. Adrian's voice echoed through speakers at all times, delivering recorded affirmations about surrender and devotion. Everything felt orchestrated to keep people in a psychological trance. During her stay, Naomi began to notice details that most guests ignored. There were restricted corridors marked private meditation zones. Certain individuals were escorted in and out of those areas, always accompanied by senior instructors. When Naomi asked about them, A staff member responded with a practiced smile and said those were for higher-level sessions. Late one night, she followed a faint sound coming from one of those corridors and saw 2 guards carrying a woman out, half-conscious and trembling. They placed her in a car and drove away through the back exit. Naomi took a photo from a distance, her heart racing. She knew she was seeing something deeply disturbing, but without proof it would be her word against a man idolized by the rich and powerful. The next day, Naomi pretended to meditate while secretly recording audio from Adrian's session. She captured fragments of his words about the merging of energies and purification through physical contact. It was enough to suggest manipulation disguised as therapy. Before leaving, she managed to access a staff computer, left unattended, and copied hidden documents into her USB drive, files that referenced payments labeled as silence agreements. When Naomi returned home, she spent nights analyzing everything she had gathered. Her evidence pointed to systematic exploitation under the guise of spiritual healing. Adrian's empire was more than a wellness center. It was a network built on power, fear, and secrecy. As she prepared her exposé, she knew she was walking into dangerous territory. But she also knew something else. If she didn't speak up, more victims would continue to suffer in the shadows of the man the world called a guru. Naomi was ready to publish her investigation. She had collected documents, photos, and testimony that could destroy Adrian Wells's empire. Her editor at the newspaper was initially thrilled. This was the kind of story that could shake the entire wellness industry. But hours before the article was set to go live, something strange happened. The editor called her in, pale and uneasy, and told her the piece was being reviewed for legal reasons. Naomi immediately sensed pressure from above. By the end of the day, the article disappeared from the publication system entirely, and her access to certain files was revoked. Someone powerful was protecting Adrian. It was as if invisible hands had reached in and silenced everything. Naomi began to receive anonymous messages warning her to drop the story. One night, she found a white envelope slid under her apartment door with only 3 words written inside: "Leave Wells alone." Adrian's influence ran deeper than she had imagined. Several of his most loyal clients were people of immense social and political power. Members of parliament, corporate leaders, even a television celebrity known for promoting mental health awareness. They attended his private retreats and funded his operations. To them, Adrian was not just a teacher, he was a brand. His downfall would mean their embarrassment, exposure, and financial ruin. So they used their influence to control the narrative. Within days, major media outlets began running stories portraying Adrian as the victim of false allegations. Carefully edited interviews were aired showing former guests praising his compassion. The tide of public opinion turned quickly, painting Naomi as an opportunist seeking attention. Then the threats escalated. Her car tires were slashed, and her phone was hacked. She began receiving calls with silence on the other end. One evening, while walking home, she noticed a black car trailing her slowly through narrow London streets. Fear began to replace her determination. She stayed at a friend's flat for a few days, constantly looking over her shoulder. But despite the fear, she couldn't let go of the story. She knew that every day she stayed silent, Adrian was manipulating more people, hurting more victims under the name of enlightenment. Meanwhile, at the Wells Center, Adrian used the controversy to strengthen his image. During live sessions, he spoke about betrayal, lies, and evil forces trying to destroy peace. His followers cheered, convinced their teacher was being attacked by corrupt journalists. The media attention even drew new guests. Curious to experience the so-called spiritual haven everyone was talking about. Adrian thrived on the chaos, claiming it was proof of his divine purpose. Naomi, exhausted but relentless, tried contacting some of the women who had allegedly left the retreat under mysterious circumstances. Most refused to talk. Some cried and hung up. One woman whispered that she was still bound by legal contracts that forbade her from speaking. Naomi realized that Adrian's empire wasn't just built on lies, it was protected by fear and silence, enforced through money and influence. Every door she knocked on closed in her face, but she refused to stop. Beneath the powerful web of corruption, she could sense a weak link waiting to break. She just needed one person brave enough to step forward, one piece of undeniable evidence that could bring down the man hiding behind the mask of holiness. Leah Turner had been living in silence for months, haunted by the memories of her time at the Wells Center. Every night she dreamed of Adrian's calm voice, turning into something sinister, his gentle words twisting into commands. She had tried to move on, to rebuild her life, but the trauma followed her everywhere. When she saw Naomi Fraser's name appear in a small online forum discussing the case, she hesitated for days before sending a message. At first, she only wrote a few vague sentences about her experience, but when Naomi replied with understanding and no pressure, Leah finally broke down and revealed everything. What she confessed was horrifying: private rituals, emotional manipulation, and how Adrian had convinced her and other women that surrendering to him physically was part of their spiritual purification. Naomi listened quietly and then asked if Leah had any proof. After a long pause, Leah said she had something that might change everything. A few days later, Leah met Naomi in a quiet cafe in Brighton, nervously clutching a small USB drive. She explained that she had copied files from Adrian's computer before leaving the center. At the time, she didn't fully understand what they were, but she had sensed they were dangerous. Naomi took the drive home, not knowing that it would expose one of the most disturbing networks of control she had ever seen. As soon as she opened the folders, her laptop screen filled with images, scanned documents, and hidden video clips. There were payment records labeled "Consultation Confidentially," non-disclosure agreements signed by dozens of women, and coded emails between Adrian and his top instructors. But the most chilling folder was titled "Initiated Soul." Inside it were files containing names, photos, and notes describing the women's supposed progress. The notes were written in Adrian's handwriting, filled with disturbing language about submission, cleansing, and possession. Naomi sat frozen for hours, realizing that this was more than a scandal. It was systematic abuse disguised as enlightenment. The evidence was overwhelming, too much to be ignored or silenced. She made multiple backups of the files and reached out to trusted contacts in digital security to verify their authenticity. Once confirmed, she began preparing to release the information anonymously to protect herself. When parts of the data appeared online a week later, they spread faster than anyone expected. Screenshots of Adrian's documents flooded social media, and former guests began speaking out, recognizing their own experiences described in the leaked notes. Hashtags calling for justice trended across the UK. As the pressure grew, authorities could no longer ignore the situation. Police began receiving formal complaints from former guests, and several women came forward publicly, giving interviews that matched Naomi's findings. The Wells Center, once a symbol of serenity, became a crime scene under investigation. Protesters gathered outside its gates, chanting for accountability. Inside the once tranquil walls, panic spread among staff as investigators closed in. Leah, watching the news from her flat, felt both fear and relief. The truth was finally surfacing. The mask Adrian had worn for years was starting to crack, and beneath it, the world was beginning to see the darkness that had always been there, a darkness that could no longer hide behind incense, smiles, and soft-spoken lies. The morning of the police raid began like any other at the Wells Center. Guests moved silently across the gardens. Instructors prepared for their meditation sessions, and Adrian Wells stood before the mirror in his private suite, adjusting the white robe that had become his signature. He was preparing for a live-streamed seminar about truth and resilience. But before he could step out of his room, the sound of engines echoed from the long gravel driveway. Within minutes, dozens of police vehicles surrounded the property. Officers stormed the gates, shouting orders as frightened guests ran in every direction. Adrian froze, watching from his window as armed officers entered the retreat he had once ruled with quiet authority. For years he had believed himself untouchable, protected by influence and money. But the illusion shattered as detectives burst into his office and presented a warrant for his arrest. The investigation uncovered the true extent of his crimes. Hidden rooms beneath the retreat were discovered, filled with surveillance equipment, hard drives and hundreds of video recordings. There were documents detailing payments to victims in exchange for silence and offshore bank accounts used to funnel money from wealthy followers. The walls that had once radiated peace were now marked with evidence tags and flashing cameras. Adrian tried to maintain his composure, claiming it was all a conspiracy, but the evidence was undeniable. When officers searched his computer, they found the same initiated Souls files Leah had exposed, proof of years of psychological and physical abuse. The media storm was immediate and relentless. Every major news outlet ran stories about the yoga guru of darkness, and the once revered face of spiritual purity became the most hated man in Britain. The trial was long and emotionally brutal. Dozens of women came forward to testify, their stories eerily similar. Promises of healing that turned into exploitation. Adrian's defense team tried to argue that the encounters were consensual and part of spiritual practice, but his own recordings betrayed him. The calm, saintly tone he used in public was replaced in those tapes by a manipulative voice, commanding, threatening, and cruel. Naomi attended every day of the hearing, documenting the proceedings for her upcoming exposé. Leah, though terrified, took the stand and described how Adrian had controlled her through fear disguised as faith. Her courage broke the last fragments of his carefully constructed image. When the verdict was finally read, the courtroom was silent. Adrian Wells was sentenced to 28 years in prison for sexual assault, coercion, fraud, and emotional abuse. As he was led away, he showed no emotion, only a cold emptiness in his eyes. As though he still believed he had done nothing wrong. The Wells Center was permanently shut down, its property seized and later converted into a rehabilitation shelter for victims of spiritual exploitation. Naomi's documentary The False Prophet aired months later, revealing every detail of the investigation. It became one of the most watched true crime programs in the UK, not for its shock value, but for the reminder it carried, that evil often hides behind gentle voices and peaceful smiles. Leah watched it alone in her flat, tears rolling down her face, not of pain but of release. The man who once controlled her was gone, and for the first time in years, she could finally breathe again.